And I was very lucky because I was his pet on that film. And as you know, he could have...
Elizabeth Taylor was one of the biggest stars the world had ever seen. But in her final years, the woman who once had everything was so short on liquid cash that she openly worried about going broke. She committed to 8 marriages filled with passion, chaos, and relentless scandals that kept draining the fortune she spent decades building. One marriage cost her her peace, another cost her years of her career, and one nearly destroyed her completely. By the time her final years rolled around, the damage had been done, and the regret she carried would haunt her forever. The first 2 mistakes. By the time Elizabeth Taylor turned 30, she had already won 2 Academy Awards, commanded $500,000 per picture, and been photographed more times than most heads of state. Her face launched 1,000 magazine covers. Critics called her the greatest natural talent of her generation. The public called her breathtaking. And Hollywood called her bankable. Yet, for all her professional success, Elizabeth never quite figured out love. She wanted it desperately, the way some people want air or water. But every time she reached for it, something went horribly wrong. She would marry 8 different times over the course of her life. And by the end, the divorces had cost her more than just legal fees. They had cost her fortune, her peace of mind, and nearly her reputation. Elizabeth's love troubles began in 1932, the moment she first said yes to a man who did not deserve her. Conrad Nicholson Hilton Jr. was called Nicky by everyone who knew him. He was the eldest son of Conrad Hilton, the founder of Hilton Hotels, and he was heir to a fortune large enough to buy small countries. At 23, Nicky was handsome in the way that old money often is, and was accustomed to getting what he wanted. He drank heavily and constantly, with a kind of desperation that should have been a warning sign to anyone paying attention. However, Elizabeth was not paying attention. They met in 1949 through the usual Hollywood channels, and what followed would shock everyone who knew them. The courtship was brief, almost laughably so. Within months, Nicky had proposed, and Elizabeth had accepted. Her mother approved, which was not surprising given the size of the Hilton bank account. Her management also approved because a wedding between Hollywood royalty and hotel royalty meant free publicity. The wedding took place on May 6, 1950, at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills. 700 guests received invitations. More than 3,000 people stood outside just to catch a glimpse. Elizabeth wore a $2,500 ivory satin gown designed by Helen Rose, the same woman who would later design Grace Kelly's wedding dress. Her trousseau cost $50,000 in custom clothing. The groom gave her a mink coat, and the wedding gifts numbered over 1,500. The wedding looked like a fairy tale, but behind the scenes, it was not. The honeymoon was scheduled to last 1 week in Carmel, followed by 5 months in Europe, but things fell apart almost immediately. Nicky began drinking on the first night and did not stop. Elizabeth later revealed in audio recordings, unearthed decades after her death, that Hilton's behavior turned aggressive during the marriage. She said he would lose control when he was drunk and take it out on her. She was pregnant at the time, and the stress and physical toll eventually contributed to a miscarriage at just 18 years old. Elizabeth filed for divorce on January 29, 1951. The legal grounds were mental cruelty, which was the standard workaround before no-fault divorce existed. The settlement gave her $500,000, equivalent to more than $5 million today. She walked away with her reputation slightly damaged, because divorces were scandalous back in the 1950s. But thankfully, her bank account was intact. She later called this marriage her first and most painful lesson about men. She did not defend it, and she never looked back on it with nostalgia. But instead of avoiding marriage altogether, she jumped into another one within a year. She concluded that she had married the wrong kind of man, so she tried the opposite. Michael Wilding was British, 39 years old, and an actor of modest fame. He had appeared in an Alfred Hitchcock film. He was quiet, intellectual, and gentlemanly. He had already been married once and divorced, and he seemed safe. Elizabeth had met Wilding in 1948 while filming The Conspirator in England. Their relationship did not begin then, but she remembered him. When she returned to London in 1951 to film Ivanhoe, she was freshly divorced and emotionally raw. Wilding provided stability. They married in February 1952 at a London registry office in a private ceremony that reflected the quiet life Wilding wanted. She later admitted she married him because he seemed so safe. Richard Burton, who knew both of them, would later observe that Wilding was a lovely man, but totally wrong for Elizabeth. 2 sons came from this marriage: Michael Wilding Jr., born in 1953, and Christopher Wilding, born in 1955. Wilding was a hands-on father. He stayed home with the boys while Elizabeth worked. But while this arrangement might have worked for a different woman, it didn't for Elizabeth Taylor. She wanted excitement, passion, and someone who would push back. Wilding was not the type to push back. He wanted domestic quiet, evenings at home, and a wife who was not the most famous movie star in the world. The marriage lasted 5 years, and their divorce was finalized in January 1957. Elizabeth got custody of the boys, but they primarily lived with Wilding in the early years. Surprisingly, she never criticized Wilding publicly. Her harshest words about him were that he was not dominant enough for their marriage to survive. She framed that as her fault, not his. She said she needed a man to push back, and Wilding simply would not do it. After Michael Wilding, Elizabeth did something she would spend the rest of her life trying to undo. She married a friend, and that friend turned out to be nothing like the quiet British actor she had just left. The great love and the biggest regret. After Wilding, Elizabeth moved on to Michael Todd, a showman in the old sense of the word. He produced theater and film, and he did it bigger and louder than anyone else. In 1956, he released a movie called Around the World in 80 Days, and it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. He also invented a new widescreen film format called Todd AO, which was his way of saying that small screens could not contain what he wanted to put on them. He was 49 years old when he met Elizabeth Taylor, and he had been married twice before. Elizabeth was still married to Michael Wilding when Todd started pursuing her. In fact, he proposed before her divorce was even final, and she did not say no. They married on February 2, 1957, in Acapulco, Mexico, and Elizabeth converted to Judaism to marry Todd. She wore a powder blue chiffon dress, which was unusually informal for someone who normally dressed like a queen at her own weddings. The guest list was small and private. Only a handful of people watched her say yes to a man who, by all accounts, made her laugh every single day. She later said Todd was the first man she considered her equal. Their marriage was tempestuous and passionate, but she never spoke of it with regret. 8 months after the wedding, she gave birth to a daughter named Elizabeth Frances Todd, fondly called Liza. She was 25 years old and a mother for the 3rd time. Todd named his private plane after her. He called it the Lucky Liz. The marriage lasted just over a year, and it ended in the most tragic way ever. On March 22, 1958, Todd flew out of Burbank, California, on a small twin-engine plane heading to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where he planned to pick up passengers before continuing to New York. The plane had been modified, Todd paid to have 2 extra fuel tanks installed, but this made the aircraft heavier than its rated weight limit. The pilot was a veteran military flyer named Bill Verner. The co-pilot was Tom Barkley. Also on board was a screenwriter named Art Cohn, who was working on Todd's biography. Elizabeth was not on the plane. She had a cold, and Todd told her to stay home and rest. Before he boarded, he said something that would later sound like a terrible joke. He said the plane was good and safe, and that it would not crash because he was carrying a picture of Elizabeth. Unfortunately, the plane went down near Grants, New Mexico. The cause was engine failure combined with icing and the added weight of the extra fuel tanks. There were no survivors. Todd was 50 years old. Among the items recovered from the wreckage were his wedding ring and a pair of platinum cufflinks. Elizabeth was inconsolable. She refused to have Todd cremated, even though his son wanted that. She buried him in a Jewish cemetery in Forest Park, Illinois. And then she did something that made sense to her at the time, but would later strike her as insane. She turned to the man who had been Todd's best friend. Eddie Fisher was a singer, one of the biggest in the 1950s. He was married to Debbie Reynolds, the star of Singin' in the Rain, and together they were considered Hollywood's ideal couple. Fisher believed he was Mike Todd's closest friend, and after the crash, he came to comfort Elizabeth while still married to Reynolds. The affair began almost immediately. Reynolds later said that Elizabeth was her friend and Eddie was her husband, and she lost them both on the same day. The scandal was enormous, and the public sided with Reynolds. But Elizabeth did not care. In fact, she later admitted she never loved Eddie Fisher. She liked him, she felt sorry for him, and she liked talking to him about Mike Todd. But that was the only thing they had in common. She married Fisher in 1959, only 3 hours after his divorce from Reynolds was finalized. The marriage lasted 4 years. She later said she did not remember much about it, except that it was one big, awful mistake. She said she knew it was a mistake before they even got married, but she did not know how to get out of it. She figured out how to get out of it in 1962. That was the year she walked onto the set of a movie called Cleopatra and met a Welsh actor named Richard Burton. The affair that followed ended her marriage to Fisher and started something much bigger. The man she was about to marry was the only one who ever came close to matching her. She would marry him twice, divorce him twice, and spend the rest of her life wondering if she should have tried a third time. The man she divorced twice. By the time Elizabeth Taylor married Richard Burton, she had already been divorced 3 times and widowed once. She had learned nothing about marriage except how to say, "I do." But Burton was different, and that was the problem. He was born the son of a coal miner in a small Welsh village near Port Talbot. He rose from that hardscrabble beginning to become the greatest Shakespearean actor of his generation. By the time he met Elizabeth Taylor, he had already built a reputation on stage and screen that few could match. He was also married to a woman named Sybil Williams, with whom he had a daughter. Elizabeth was still married to Eddie Fisher when she arrived in Rome to film Cleopatra in 1962. The film was already famous for being the most expensive movie ever made. The production was chaotic. The budget was ballooning. Elizabeth had fallen ill, and production had stopped for months. By the time Burton walked onto the set, she was already there, waiting. He had a hangover that first day. His hand was shaking as he tried to drink a cup of coffee. Elizabeth noticed. She walked over, took the cup, and held it to his lips so he could drink. Their eyes locked. He finished the cup, and they kept looking at each other. She later said that was the moment everything changed. Burton described her that first day as the most sullen, uncommunicative, and beautiful woman he had ever seen. The affair that followed was not quiet. It could not have been. They were two of the most famous people in the world, and both were married to other people. The press camped outside the studio gates. Reporters filed daily stories about every glance, every dinner, and every late night on set. The Vatican issued a statement denouncing the affair, which was unprecedented for a secular celebrity relationship. In fact, some politicians in the United States called for Elizabeth to be denied re-entry to the country. None of it stopped them. By the time her divorce from Fisher was finalized, she and Burton were already planning their wedding. They married 10 days later, on March 15, 1964, at the Ritz-Carlton in Montreal. She said that if she and Richard ever divorced, she would never marry anyone again. She loved him insanely, and she meant it at the time. The marriage was a spectacle of excess. Burton bought her jewels that belonged in a museum. In 1969, he paid $37,000 for a 16th-century pearl called La Peregrina. That same pearl would sell for nearly $12 million after her death. He bought her a 33-carat diamond known as the Krupp diamond for around $300,000. For her 40th birthday, he gave her a necklace that once belonged to the Taj Mahal. He indulged her love of diamonds not because she asked, but because he enjoyed giving them. But the jewels were not the story. The story was how much they fought. They drank heavily, both of them. Burton later said he exploded violently about twice a year with Elizabeth, and she exploded too. Elizabeth said maybe they loved each other too much, which sounds romantic until you realize she meant it literally. They could not be calm together. Every emotion ran hot, and when two people burn that brightly for that long, something eventually gives. Burton also wrestled with jealousy, not of other men, but of his own career. He felt he had sacrificed serious acting to become a celebrity. He was one of the great Shakespeareans of his time, but the world only wanted to talk about his marriage to Elizabeth Taylor, and this troubled him a lot. They divorced on June 26, 1974, in Switzerland, and the settlement was estimated between $7 and $10 million. It was not enough to make her poor, but it was a significant cut. To everyone's shock, they remarried on October 10, 1975, in a remote village in Botswana, Africa. They chose the location to avoid the press, but the marriage lasted just 5 months, and the divorce was finalized on July 29, 1976. Richard Burton died on August 5, 1984, in Switzerland at the age of 58. When she heard the news, she was inconsolable. She asked Burton's widow, a woman named Sally, if she could be buried next to him. But Sally said no. Although Elizabeth said she would not remarry after Burton, she went on to marry 2 more times after him, and both marriages would end in divorce. Both men would take pieces of her fortune with them when they left. And by the time she stopped saying yes to wedding proposals, the money she had earned from a lifetime of being the biggest movie star in the world was almost gone. The final marriages. Elizabeth Taylor was 44 years old when her second divorce from Richard Burton was finalized. She had been married 6 times to 5 different men. Most people would have stopped, looked at the pattern, and concluded that marriage was not for them. But Elizabeth Taylor never learned that lesson, or maybe she learned it and simply did not care. She married 2 more times after Burton. The first was a politician, and the second was a construction worker. Neither marriage lasted, but both took something from her. And by the time she walked away from the second one, the fortune she had spent a lifetime earning was already leaking out faster than she could replace it. John Warner was a Virginia Republican with a future in politics. He had served as Secretary of the Navy under President Richard Nixon. When he met Elizabeth Taylor in 1976, He was on his way to becoming a United States Senator, a position he would hold for 30 years. They were introduced on a blind date at a bicentenary dinner honoring the Queen of England at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. The courtship was fast, and within a few months, they were married. The wedding took place on December 4, 1976, in Virginia. Elizabeth Taylor, one of the most famous actresses in the history of cinema, became a Senate wife. That meant attending political functions, shaking hands with donors, smiling at charity galas, and standing beside her husband at campaign events. She did it without complaint, but the role came at a cost she had not fully anticipated. During the 5 years she was married to Warner, she made exactly one film, a minor musical called A Little Night Music. The offers kept coming, but she turned them down because her husband's career required her presence in Washington. The income she lost by not working during those years ran into the millions. Hollywood does not wait for anyone, even Elizabeth Taylor. Every year she stayed away. Her asking price dropped a little lower. In 1978, Warner ran for the United States Senate. Taylor headlined his rallies and drew enormous crowds. People came to see her, not him, but she used that attention to promote his candidacy. He eventually won and served from 1979 until 2009. But the marriage did not survive the victory. The divorce came in 1982. Warner later explained it simply. He said he became so absorbed in the Senate that he had nothing left for her, and she became so absorbed in her London theater productions that she had nothing left for him. There was no betrayal, scandal, or dramatic fight. They simply grew apart. A prenuptial agreement was in place, so there was no major financial settlement. They remained friends until his death decades later. The marriage to Warner cost Elizabeth Taylor millions in lost earnings, but not a dollar in divorce settlements. But the next marriage would cost her much more directly. Larry Fortensky was 39 years old when he met Elizabeth Taylor. He was a construction worker with a high school diploma. He had no connection to Hollywood, no fame, no fortune, and no public profile. They met in 1988 at the Betty Ford Center in Rancho Mirage, California, where both were being treated for substance abuse. Elizabeth later announced their engagement in 1991. The public reaction was merciless. Commentators mocked her for marrying beneath her class. Tabloids ran headlines suggesting she had lost her mind. But Taylor ignored all of it. She said she did not care what people thought. He made her happy, and that was enough. The wedding took place on October 6, 1991, at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. Jackson covered the expenses as a gift to his friend. Security was tight. Paparazzi helicopters circled overhead but could not get close. Taylor wore a pale yellow silk gown. She was 59 years old. He was 39. Fortensky moved into her Bel Air home. He found Hollywood overwhelming, which was not surprising for a man who had spent his life on construction sites rather than red carpets. Unfortunately, just like her previous marriages, this one came to a painful end after some years. The marriage lasted 5 years, and the divorce was finalized on October 31, 1996. The settlement was relatively small compared to her earlier divorces, but still significant. Fortensky received a lump sum of $1.2 million, plus a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, a BMW, and a Dolphin motorhome. More importantly, he signed a legal agreement that forbade him from making any public statements about Taylor that were disparaging, flattering, or even neutral. He signed away all rights to book deals, film interviews, or television appearances about their marriage. But that was not the end of her financial entanglement with Larry Fortensky. After the divorce, he suffered a serious fall that left him unable to work, and he lost his house to foreclosure. His sister called Taylor without his knowledge and told her what had happened. The next day, Taylor sent a check for $15,000 to keep the bank away. Sadly, it did not save the house, and he lost it anyway. She also began sending him $1,000 a month. She wrote him a letter explaining why. She said she had been thinking of him often and worrying about him. She said she wanted to send him a little help every month for the rest of her life, or until she went broke. Fortensky later said he never asked for the money, but he accepted it. By the time Elizabeth Taylor entered her final years, she had given away or lost more money than most people will ever see. The divorces had taken millions. The lifestyle had taken millions more. And her greatest expense was still ahead of her, one that had nothing to do with her many husbands. The tragic final days of Elizabeth Taylor. On March 23, 2011, Elizabeth Taylor died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles at the age of 79. The official cause of death was congestive heart failure, a condition she had battled for years. But the heart that failed her had been failing for a long time. Worn down by decades of surgeries, addictions, and the physical toll of living one of the most public lives in human history. She entered the hospital in the last weeks of March 2011. Her weight had dropped below 98 pounds. She was frail in a way that shocked even the nurses who had seen dying patients before. The woman who had once been the most beautiful face in Hollywood was barely visible beneath the tubes and blankets. She barely had visitors. She had outlived most of her friends and alienated many of the rest. But one visitor did come. Debbie Reynolds, the woman whose husband Taylor had stolen more than 50 years earlier, walked into that hospital room and sat by her bedside. The two women had reconciled years before. The financial reality at the moment of her death was not what anyone expected. Elizabeth Taylor reportedly had limited liquid cash that could be accessed immediately. The bulk of her wealth was tied up in real estate, jewelry, and legal trusts. The Bel Air home she had bought in 1982 for $1.9 million was worth $8 to $10 million at her death. The chalet in Gstaad, Switzerland, purchased in the 1970s, was worth millions more. But none of that could be spent without selling it first. Her medical bills during those final weeks were enormous. The last 2 weeks of intensive cardiac care at Cedars-Sinai cost more than $500,000. Some procedures and private nursing were not fully covered by insurance, and some rumors claim her estate had to borrow money against future auction proceeds just to keep current on her care. When she died, her funeral cost $180,000, and some insiders also believe the cash had to be borrowed too, against the anticipated revenue from selling her jewelry. She was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, next to her parents. But that was not where she wanted to be. She wanted to be buried next to Richard Burton. 9 months later, on December 13th and 14th, 2011, Christie's auction house in New York sold her jewelry collection. The total came to $115 million, a world record for a private jewelry collection. The La Peregrina pearl necklace that Burton had bought for $37,000 in 1969 sold for nearly $12 million. The Krupp diamond ring sold for almost $9 million. The Taj Mahal necklace that Burton gave her for her 40th birthday sold for $8.8 million. Art, furniture, and costumes added another $41 million. The total auction revenue was approximately $156 million. Her estimated net worth before the auction was somewhere between $600 million and $1 billion. Almost all of it went to the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, which she had founded in 1991. Her 4 children received inheritances. Her 9 grandchildren received trusts. And Larry Fortensky, the construction worker she married at Neverland Ranch, received $825,000. He had not asked for it, but she left it to him anyway. Elizabeth Taylor had millions, but she could not write a check for her own funeral without selling something first. The star, who burned brighter than anyone else, spent her final days in a hospital bed, waiting for a loan to cover her own death. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.